This is 100 Years of Cocks. You are listening to a podcast by Frances Thompson. I'm telling the story of 10 siblings from the Machel Cox family through the letters they wrote to each other. They were born in England between 1868 and 1884. 7 of them lived in England and 3 lived abroad in the colonies. These siblings are my family. Sibling number 2, Edmund, is my great-grandfather. It is October 1907. Neville's last letter described his travels through Belgium and Germany. And in this letter he describes Lucerne and Lugano in Switzerland, as well as Lake Como, Milan, Venice, Rome, Naples and Pompeii in Italy. If you didn't live in England in the 1980s and 90s, you may never have heard this slogan. Don't just book it, Thomas, cook it. I know quite a lot of you are listening in countries all over the world, but the 10 siblings were English, so you get quite a bit of British history in this podcast. Thomas Cook and Son was one of the world's earliest travel companies, effectively inventing package tours and opening up foreign travel to the lower classes. Trips to Europe were previously only available to the rich and wealthy. That all changed at the end of the 1800s, and tourism became hugely popular. In 1907, Neville goes to Cook's office in St. Mark's Square in Venice and books a tour, and he does the same in Naples, going to Cook's office and booking a tour to Pompeii. Neville comments how easy it is that he pays his money and then the guide handles all the arrangements, the travel costs, as well as all the entry fees. Second instalment started October 24th, 1907, from the Hotel International au Lac, Lugano, Switzerland. Dear family, the train at Lucerne was the Paris-Milan Corridor Express and was exceedingly comfortable, better than any second-class train I was ever on in England. There was a dining car, but as I was due at Lugano at 1:30, I did not go to it. The thick fog lifted by 9:30 a.m, and the scenery was very fine. I think mountain railway travel must be much the same as far as the views of the different mountains and the endless change of scenery is concerned. The very green valley was exceedingly pretty, and it beat the Rockies hollow, where the valleys are too narrow to allow of anything but the river and the railway. Here in Switzerland there is nothing to beat the Three Sisters, Mount Field or the Glacier. But here there are more pretty waterfalls to be seen, and at some places the water falls from a very great height. The St. Gothard Tunnel was very long, but not nearly as stuffy as I expected. We waited 5 minutes at the entrance station, and most of the passengers made a wild dash for plates of soup, which were steaming hot. It was a most amusing scene, and the mixture of languages was most amusing and confusing. I had another small child in the compartment who would sing all the time, and I had another child from Basel to Lucerne. They seemed to haunt me. Arrived at Lugano at 1:30 p.m. on Wednesday. A lovely day with a high wind over the lake. Lake is very pretty. Walked all over the town after leaving bags at Hotel International. Bed cost 3.5 francs. Mostly Italian spoken and some really dirty old streets. Shops are mostly curiosity and photo ones. Table d'hôte at 7 p.m. There was another Englishman who made a great noise, spoke outlandish French, and in the middle amused everyone by calling out that he wanted the head waiter. He told the waiter in English, very loudly, that he had overeaten himself and wanted a cigar. Waiter wanted to know if there was anything wrong with the dinner. The reply was, "No, it was too damned good." wrote my budget letter till 11:30 p.m. and then went to bed. I'm writing this downstairs after breakfast at a table, and my Englishman has just turned up at 9:45 a.m. and he tells the manager, "I slept well and I feel better," and is talking very loudly, saying a lot of rubbish, and smoking a 3 franc cigar, which he asked for. None of your ... trash for me. The other visitors are very annoyed. It is raining hard, and I started this whilst waiting for my steamer. I do hope it will clear up for my trip up the lake and across to Como. Naples, 10 p.m, Monday, October 28th. I am now in Naples, and I ought to have been on the water on the ship by now. But the Herzog won't be in till Wednesday morning, as they had a terrific gale in the Bay of Biscay. The sea has been coming over the esplanade in regular showers, and it has blown so that one could hardly keep one's feet. To continue news of my trip, with my notebook at my side. The rain cleared at 10 a.m. on Thursday in Lugano, but at 10:30, just as I was on the boat, it came down again in torrents, and the mist settled down too, completely spoiling the view. Now and again, as the mist lifted, one got a splendid glimpse of rugged peaks, no great height, but very fine for all that. The finest were about halfway to Porlezza, on the left-hand side. It was still pouring when we arrived at Porlezza. I forgot to say that at about halfway across the lake, a customs official sealed all our bags with a sort of postage stamps, and we were not allowed to touch them till we were in the train at Porlezza. This was the only time, except at Antwerp, that I was spoken to by customs people, and they never bothered at all. A curious sort of steam train took us over the pass to Menaggio on Lake Como. Nothing to be seen until we reached the summit, and then the rain ceased for a short time, and the descent was very pretty. The train ran through a lovely wooded cleft in the hills, and as we neared Lake Como, there was a fine view up to the north end, with a very high peak on the horizon. However, down came the rain and mist again, and I never saw more than a few 100 feet up the mountain sides after that. The lake itself is very pretty, and it seems almost as if in the old days someone up aloft had dropped a lot of paper, and wherever it happened to alight, there a village was built. They are thick all along the lake. Had lunch on the steamer, which was very good. Reached Como and trammed up to the station, which took 7 minutes, only to find that the 4 p.m. train had been taken off since the day before. A great nuisance, as I should have reached Milan in daylight. As it was, we did not get there till after 8, and so I only saw the cathedral by night. It was simply pouring with rain when we reached Milan. Found the station was a long way from the centre of town, so I took a tram to the cathedral, nearly 20 minutes, and found a fine square surrounding it. On one side is the Emmanuel Gallery, a sort of covered arcade, very high. The square was a perfect network of tram lines, running in every direction, with any number of shops and restaurants in it. Evidently it is a great meeting place, and the restaurants all have tables set outside. The square was a perfect maze of electric trams, and was well lighted. In fact, all the towns but Venice were all nothing but tram lines. The cathedral showed up splendidly, and really was superb. I was so sorry I could not see inside. I filled in time drinking café au lait, and returned to the station at 11 p.m. Train left at 11:20. Had noisy young Italians in my carriage till 1:30 a.m. And then just 2 of us had the carriage to ourselves, and I slept till we reached Venice at 4:20 a.m. The train was actually on time, the only time since I left Lucerne. The rain had stopped, and the moon was shining. Took a gondola for Hotel Luna. The station is right at one end of Grand Canal, and St. Mark's and most of the hotels are at the far end, and it took about half an hour in the gondola. The wind was very high, so we took a lot of narrow canals most of the way, as the waves were very high on the Grand Canal. The smell was beastly, but the gondola was comfortable, and it was decidedly weird by moonlight. I was asleep when we reached the hotel. I paid the gondolier 2 lire and then went straight to bed. Up at 9:30, blowing hard, but the rain had stopped. Went all over St. Mark's, which was most interesting, especially the jewelled reredos, which came from San Sofia in Constantinople, right at the back of the high altar, and for which a fee of 50 cents is charged. The coloured glass frescoes on the ceiling and the walls were very interesting, and also the collection of precious odds and ends in the treasury. Another 50 cents to go up outside, which was hardly worth it. I spent over 2 hours there. The pigeons were in their hundreds outside, and so very tame. People were feeding them by hand. Rather a fine square, round with a covered pavement. Shops are nearly all small, and mostly curio shops. There was an interesting clock showing sun, earth, and moon, with one hand pointing to the hour. It looked as if the sun and the moon moved, and the earth kept still. A huge face, and all the signs of the zodiac. 24 hours were shown. The time itself was shown in this way, on 2 squares, with white figures, which were altered every 5 minutes, and 2 figures struck a bell on the top of the hour. I have drawn a sketch of it for you. S is the sun, which seemed to move on the hours. E is the earth, which was at the centre. M is the moon, which seemed to move round in a groove. It was really rather interesting watching it. It was higher than any of the houses, and had a driveway through the bottom part of it. I walked round some of the old streets, and I went into a glass bead factory, not very interesting, which I should advise no one to do, as it is only a trap to make you buy things, and it's quite a job to get out again. Had lunch, and then, as it was fine, I went to cook, and joined a party going round the rest of the town, mostly by gondola. Just as we reached the canal, it began to pour with rain. So as we had paid, we took the steamer instead, and did the round, but it was not worth it. Rialto Bridge was rather fine, and also the church of barefooted friars near the station, and some of the paintings in the Jesuit church were very good. Cook charged 5 shillings for the afternoon and paid all the fees, which saved a lot of trouble, but the guide rushed things too much. He had to pay everywhere we went. The steamer is only a penny each time you leave it, even if you only go 1 station or the whole length of the Grand Canal. I should advise that you get a good guidebook and go by the 1-penny steamer by yourself. It is not worth taking a gondola, as you would be off and on so much, and the steamer stops so frequently. The smells in the street are too foul for words, and the dirt! It poured with rain the whole time, and I was jolly glad to get back to the hotel. I intended leaving for Florence that evening, but the weather was too beastly, so I decided to go straight through to Rome the next morning at 9:55. I was staying at Hotel Luna, or De Luna, and was very comfortable. Must stop now, as it is 11:30 p.m. and I am going to Pompeii tomorrow, so I will try and finish this tomorrow night. There is a fine old thunderstorm raging in Naples at the moment. I left Venice for Rome at 9:55 a.m. on Saturday 26th of October on a direct train and arrived, 2 hours late, at about midnight. It was pouring with rain most of the way. The scenery through the Apennines was decidedly pretty and constantly changing. Any amount of vines, the dwarf ones on the hillsides. I went to the Hotel Milan at Rome, a very comfortable bed, but 5.5 lire, rather dear. Up at 7:30, and after breakfast I took a cab for St. Peter's, about 20 minutes drive, 1 lire. It kept fine until I got inside, then there was a thunderstorm. I took a guide. Outside there was nothing to look at, but it is very vast inside, on the plan of St. Paul's. The marble is grand, all colours, and the whole church is covered with it. The mosaic pictures, of which there are a lot, were decidedly good, and some of them were very clever. What struck one most was the proportion of objects. As one entered, a group of angels on the left and the right looked quite an ordinary size, but when one walked up to them, one found that they were tremendous. So also a dove on the wall, which looked quite an ordinary size and easily within reach, but turned out to be about 2 feet and quite 7 feet off the ground. St. Peter looked very insignificant, but it was extraordinary how his toes were worn away on the one foot. It was most interesting right through. I saw a baptism, but anything more irreverent I don't think I ever saw. The rain had finished when I came out, so I walked right to the far end of town to see the gardens and the view, as it was no use attempting anything else. They are high up on a hill, and the view is very fine over the town, and the gardens themselves are pretty and shady, and I sat there for some time. Endless priests were about in cassocks of every variety of hue, but they did look a poor set of men. I saw a curious street scene, a horse drawing a heavy load of trussed hay, and tied to one shaft, and reaching about 6 inches beyond his head, was one small truss, which the horse was busily eating. It did look odd, and I saw another one later on, so it must be a local custom. I left Rome after lunch at 1:30 in heavy rain, and reached Naples at 8:20, 2 hours late. The trains do dawdle along in Italy. The train was very filthy and packed nearly all the way. It rained hard the whole time and was still raining when one arrived at Naples. Went to Hotel Londra, as I thought it was only one night. Expensive bed, 6 lire. Found out next morning, Monday, October 28th, that the steamer was late and would not leave Naples till after 11 on Wednesday. It has been through a very heavy weather in the Bay of Biscay. Went to Cook to find out what was going on, and booked a trip to Pompeii for Tuesday at 9 a.m. I walked along the seafront. There was a tremendous wind and huge waves and frequent thunderstorms. Side streets are filthy to a degree, and the natives ditto. The smells are frankly awful. Cabs and beggars are a regular nuisance. Cabmen will follow you for a quarter of a mile, calling out English cab, American cab, and if you leave a shop or a hotel, you hear whistles on every side of you, and they come charging down on you. They don't care what they say, whether ladies are near or not, and they make you so ashamed you just have to bolt. The pretty gendarmes, who go about in couples, are useless, and they never interfere. Street sanitary arrangements are too unspeakable for words. Naples is crowded, and yet very picturesque in a way. Women, though dirty, are mostly pretty, and lots of the boys have faces just like girls. Of course, there are some fearful hags and beastly cripples of both sexes who are allowed to beg. Ladies cannot very well go out without a man. At least, that is what I hear the American ladies in the hotel saying. The bay itself is lovely, and the colours of the water are magnificent and of every shade of blue. Went to the National Museum in the afternoon, and the sculptures are simply grand. Lots from Pompeii, both sculpture, frescoes and bronzes. The expressions on some of the faces are just as if they were alive. The gladiators, Apollo, Adonis, Venus Calypso, Faun and the Bacchus were most lifelike. Hercules, though I suppose the anatomy is grand, is to me rather a huge beast. Cannot remember all, and one should spend 2 or 3 days there. I only just had time to glimpse at the pictures, as the museum closed at 3:30. I did enjoy it, and so would all of you, I think. I looked in at 1 or 2 churches on the way back to the hotel. Some were very pretty inside, and rather fine, but other churches were rather tawdry. There are trams running everywhere, and through some very narrow streets. All day the thunderstorms continued. Wrote budget letter after dinner. Tuesday 29th. Up at 7:30 and went to Pompeii with a party of 19. We consisted of 3 Americans, 6 English, 5 Italians, 2 Germans and 3 French. We had 2 guides, one for the English and the Americans, and the other guide spoke German, Italian and French. A long and dirty drive through town to the station, then a long and uninteresting railway journey to Pompeii by electric train, arriving there at 11:30. Pompeii was most interesting. A tremendous lot has been excavated, and the walls, minus their roofs, of house after house and street after street are all excavated. Walls of houses vary from 8 to 15 or 20 feet, I should think, and were all buried in the ashes. The main streets were about 12 feet wide, with a sidewalk of about 3 feet, and the minor streets were about 5 feet wide, with a 1-foot sidewalk. They were all paved with big blocks of stone, very rough, but plainly showing the marks of wheels. Some of the houses were most interesting, and the coloured stuccos on the walls, looking like mosaics and marbles, were in some cases in marvellous preservation. You cannot really see the place in the time at your disposal, and should come 2 or 3 times, only it is so far away from Naples. But the guide shows one all the most interesting places, and it is really very necessary, unless you have heaps of time and a good guidebook. Cave Canem was splendid in mosaic. Theatres, bathhouse, forum, temples, place of graves, the house of the wine merchant, I forget his name, they were all most interesting. Some of the mosaics were rather so-so, and 1 or 2 very short-sighted ladies got very shocked at times, rather embarrassing, but also rather amusing. 2 terrific thunderstorms. Had lunch there. Endless fees to see different things in Pompeii, but Cook did everything, from and returned to his office for 17 lire, which saved endless bother. Official guides were there, costing 2 lire every hour. Arrived back at Naples at 7, and rain was pouring again. Rather tired after all the tramping about, and am finishing this after table d'hôte. The waiters in the hotel here annoy me very much, as whenever you go to sit down, they will insist on shoving the chair in. It invariably catches you at the back of the knee, and you come down hard. Where was it, Bernard, where we saw that in the theatre? There, I think I've done my duty. I only wish Burr could have been with me, as it is lonely at night. Lack of Italian is a nuisance on the streetcars here, and one practically can't use them for that reason, as the town is very puzzling. Thank you everyone for the hospitality extended to me at home, and I've had a really good holiday, and it was a real treat seeing you all again. Neville. Notes on Neville's letter. The 3 sisters, Mount Field and the Glacier, these are all mountains in British Columbia in Canada. Neville thinks the Canadian Rockies are more impressive than the mountains in Switzerland. Table d'hôte is a French phrase. It means the table belonging to the host, and it dates back to when early travellers were eating alongside the host. It is a fixed meal with a fixed price, with little or no choice of food. Neville is staying in smart hotels. Table d'hôte would be at a fixed time and a fixed price, with probably 3 courses for dinner. The Hotel International au Lac in Lugano, Switzerland, which is still there, cost 3.5 francs for 1 night, and Neville is amused at the outrageously loud Englishman who shouted at the waiter, saying he had overeaten himself. Neville writes that the Englishman was smoking a 3-franc cigar. He is suggesting that such a cigar was expensive. His -- suggests the Englishman said, "I want a good foreign cigar, none of your local muck." but Neville is far too polite to actually write that in a letter to his siblings, hence the fact that he misses words out. It's not straightforward to work out today's equivalent of 3 francs in 1907. It's probably easier to compare the cost of his cigar to the 3.5 francs that Neville paid for one night in a hotel, which I think makes it sound like an expensive cigar, not that I know anything about cigars. Neville was very unlucky with the weather, and it pours with rain at Lake Como. If you have never been, it is a stunning place. Neville takes a steamer down the lake, and he also travels by tram and steam train, but he doesn't see much of the mountains or the fabulous views. I've just been wandering around Milan, using Street View and dropping the little yellow figure down. The Galleria Vittorio Emanuele is one of Italy's oldest shopping malls and is a 4-story arcade with a glass roof and stunning domes soaring overhead. The Galleria was completed in 1877, and in 1907 it would have been very striking, new and modern. The Galleria houses luxury shops today, and it is indeed next door to the cathedral, as Neville describes. However, he said that trams crisscross the square. Today it is pedestrianised, although there are still trams elsewhere in Milan. Neville drank café au lait, sitting in the piazza, waiting for his train and people watching. He was sad that he arrived in Milan late and that the cathedral is closed, as there are many treasures inside that he was hoping to see. He draws a sketch of the Galleria Emanuele and the cathedral and the piazza and the trams. I will put his sketch on Twitter. Neville heads to the station at 11 o'clock at night and is now off to Venice. I've been exploring Venice online as well and finding all the places Neville went to. He arrived at the train station in Venice at 4 in the morning, and a gondola takes him to his hotel, which is at the other end of the Grand Canal. It's very easy to imagine a cold and windy autumn night with a lot of waves, so the gondolier avoids the Grand Canal and zigzags through the smaller canals whilst Neville falls asleep. I was surprised to see that Neville stayed at Venice's oldest hotel. It looks like it is also one of the most luxurious and expensive, just minutes from St. Mark's Square. The Hotel Luna is a palatial building dating back to the 12th century. It was previously a convent as well as a palace, and it also has links to the Knights Templar. It was already a hotel in 1574, and today it has some stunning suites with private rooftop terraces. Neville sadly doesn't say how much a room in this beautiful old hotel cost in 1907. He just says he was very comfortable there. Neville then gives a fascinating description of the old astronomy clock tower, which is adjacent to St. Mark's on the square. It was the world's first digital clock, and there are also 2 figures up on the roof with torsos that rotate, so their hammers strike the bell on the hour. There are many reviews online describing the tour of the clock tower as a must-see in Venice. Neville would have described the views of Venice from the top of the clock tower as very fine. The clock tower and its intricate machinery wasn't open to the public in 1907, and Neville only enjoys it from the outside. He is fascinated with how the clock works, describes it in great detail for his siblings, and he draws a sketch of it in his letter as well. I will put Neville's sketch of the clock on Twitter, as well as a modern photo. Neville goes on a tour in Venice. He goes to Cook's office in St. Mark's Square and books a tour, paying 5 shillings to go round Venice by gondola, with the guide arranging the entry fees to all the places they visit. But it pours with rain, so the party goes by steamer instead of gondola. And Neville is not that impressed with the tour. The guide rushes them round, and Neville thinks he should have got a guidebook instead and gone round Venice on his own. Interestingly, Neville refers to Cook's prices in Venice using English pennies and shillings, whereas he says the Pompeii tour cost 17 lira. Thomas Cook and Son revolutionised travel with their use of circular notes, which were traveller's checks, making foreign travel much easier. Cook made tours easy for the traveller, as the tour guide paid all the separate fees, including the entry and the travel costs, as Neville said, saving endless bother. It's very likely that Neville would have used Cook's circular notes, cashing them in for local currency in the different countries he visited. Perhaps he paid for his Venice tour using a 5-shilling circular note. Neville says that the smells in Venice are too foul for words, and the dirt. Neville actually draws 3 exclamation marks to make his point. The 10 siblings argued about where it was appropriate to use even 1 exclamation mark in a sentence. Arthur would have been very shocked at Neville using 3 exclamation marks. But we can assume that Venice was very smelly and very dirty in 1907. Neville gets a train to Rome, where he stays at the Hotel Milan, another grand old hotel which still exists today. A short carriage ride in the 1800s would get you to the famous opera house La Scala. The composer Verdi also lived at the Hotel Milan, and it had a very modern hydraulic lift when it was built at the end of the 1800s. Neville says that it was a bit expensive for him, with a room costing 5.5 lire. If you've never been to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, it is a gigantic church next door to the Vatican. Neville talks of the statue of St. Peter with 1 foot worn smooth. He's quite right, it is St. Peter's right foot, which sticks out, and for hundreds of years both pilgrims and visitors have touched the foot, and it is now worn quite smooth. It is still pouring with rain, and Neville mentions several thunderstorms. He was very unlucky with the weather during his European travels. His train from Rome to Naples is packed and filthy, but fortunately no small children are sick all over his trousers on this journey. On Sunday 27th of October, Neville arrives in Naples and goes to the Hotel Londra, a huge grand hotel right on the waterfront. The building is still there, but it now contains offices opposite the Castel Nuovo. Neville stays there because it is right next to the port where his ship will sail from. But the ship has been delayed due to the bad weather. Neville expected to only stay 1 night in Naples, hence the expensive hotel on the waterfront, but he now has to pay for 3 nights until his ship arrives. He thinks he is spending too much money, but as he is in Naples, with time to spare, he goes to the office of Thomas Cook to find out what was going on, and he books a tour to Pompeii. Perhaps Cook was the best source of local news and would know when his ship, the Herzog, was going to arrive. Neville is really quite scathing in his description of Naples, and he paints a fascinating picture. The smells are terrible. The streets are filthy, and so are the local people. The street hawkers and the beggars continually bother him. The women are very dirty, but some are quite pretty. But Neville writes that there are some fearful hags and beggars. The police are no use. It pours with rain. Thunderstorms continue all day long. The cabbies follow Neville, repeatedly asking if he wants a cab. Poor Neville clearly looked like a wealthy Englishman, but he takes refuge from both people and weather in a museum, and then really enjoys the sculptures and tells his siblings that they really should visit Naples after all. On Tuesday 29th of October, Neville was at Pompeii. Thank you, Neville, for providing so much detail in your letter. The tour cost 17 lire, with endless fees for different things. A long and dirty drive through Naples, then a long electric train journey, but Cook handled everything, saving endless bother. A party of 19 tourists with 2 guides, quite a select group. Pompeii was still being excavated in the early 1900s and was a great curiosity to early tourists. Neville talks about the mosaics which survived. Cave Canem is Latin, meaning beware of the dog. You can see a picture of it if you look online. Entertainingly, Neville is far too polite to actually describe the erotic and graphic stone carvings, graffiti and frescoes which he sees. He only mentions that it was rather amusing to witness how shocked some of the ladies were at what they saw. If you've got no idea what I'm talking about, look up Pompeii online. It is decorated with a lot of graphic images. If you have never been, it may make you want to travel to Italy. One day, perhaps. Neville very much enjoys Pompeii, and he arrives back in Naples, where it is still raining, having had a good day. He finishes his letter and tells his family he has had a lovely holiday. Neville posts his letter and boards his ship, which would then have taken several weeks to travel through the Suez Canal and back to South Africa. His brother, Aldwin, wrote several fascinating long accounts of long journeys by sea from Africa to England, which I will read in a future episode. In the next episode of 100 Years of Cox, we have letters from Edmund, Avis and Enid, written in November 1907. The siblings are now planning a special Christmas edition of the budget, which Bernard is editing, and both Dr. Cox and Mrs. Cox contribute articles as well. The siblings are busy writing items for it, including the wildly popular limericks, which will make Cuthbert cross. The 1907 Christmas budget will be coming up soon in the podcast. Edmund has a headache, and his letter is late again, although he has made a better effort this time. Well done, Edmund. Send your sixpence to Sydenham again. Avis has been to the Savoy Theatre to see a doily cart production of The Yeoman of the Guard, and she is playing hockey and wearing a short hockey skirt. But there is no cause for alarm. Avis is still quite respectable. The hem of a short hockey skirt stopped about 10 centimetres above the ankle in the early 1900s. Enid starts the family discussion regarding the dramatic Druce Portland case, which was very high profile and was in all the newspapers, concerning mistaken identity, the Duke of Portland, a lot of money, and whether or not a coffin should be exhumed and opened. Gripping stuff. People were clearly interested, as the siblings go on to discuss it at length in their next letters. 100 Years of Cox. The Machel Cox budget letters and all content is subject to copyright and belongs to both myself and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Machel Cox Letters is on Twitter, where I share budget photos, sketches and interesting bits and pieces. If you have any questions, please write to me, machelcoxletters@gmail.com. You have been listening to 100 Years of Cox. Thank you for listening.